Film emulation is an increasingly popular topic. Many filmmakers strive to transfer the special aesthetics of analog film to their digital footage. This can be achieved in many different programs with many different tools. One of these tools is Dehancer, a film emulation plugin for a number of different applications. Dehancer approached me and asked if I would do a video review of their plugin. They gave me a license to do so. However, this video is not intended to be a commercial. It will only contain my completely honest opinion. I'm by no means a specialist in film emulation and I've never shot on analog film, just to say that up front. I make my living in video production, primarily in post-production with a focus on color grading. So much from my perspective on this plugin. So let's get started. Dehancer is available for a range of host applications. There's a plugin for Premiere Pro, After Effects, one for Final Cut Pro, and an OFX version that works with DaVinci Resolve. I was provided with the Resolve version for this test, and my review only refers to this version. The installation is self-explanatory and described in detail in the manual, so let's get straight to the fun part. The Dehancer plugin can be found on the color page under the effects and is applied directly to our color node. Although an input camera profile can be selected right at the top of the plugin, it makes sense to work with color space transforms in the Resolve version, as these are much more accurate. It is also easier to use the same color space for all shots in a project. For example, the Dehancer plugin can also be applied to an entire group or even the entire timeline. So I bring my raw shots into the Rec 709 color space using a CST node and set Rec 709 as the input for Dehancer. The node structure suggested by the manufacturer looks like this. First, we have our primary corrections, our masks, then comes the color space transform, the CST. The next node would be the Dehancer OFX plugin, and in the end, after the plugin, if needed, some sharpening. Dehancer also works in a color-managed ACES or DaVinci wide gamut pipeline, for example. For this review, however, I'm doing the color management manually with CSTs. Now everything is set up and the creative part can begin. All settings are located one below the other in the inspector. The sheer number of options makes the menu relatively confusing, but I will go through each group from top to bottom. I won't explain every option in detail, as that would go beyond the time frame, and to be honest, I'm not yet familiar with every tool in detail after such a short time. To begin with, we have exposure, temperature and tint compensation. These options are there to correct any inconsistencies in the shot footage. In other words, exposure and white balance. These corrections can be made either in a separate node with Resolve board tools or in Dehancer. Then we have two defringe sliders. These adjustments help to correct any chromatic aberrations at the edges. Now it gets exciting. In the next section we find a drop-down menu for all the different film stocks. According to Dehancer, these are all modeled on real film stocks down to the last detail. This is the film negative, so the film that is inside the camera for recording. We'll come to the film print later. The selection is really huge. I would recommend simply clicking through and trying out what you like. The color contrast can be changed with the push-pull slider. The film developer menu emulates the chemical development of the film. Here we have contrast boost, gamma correction, color separation and color boost. A much loved characteristic of analog film is the compressed tonal range. The not so nice clipping that is often seen with digital footage happens much later with film, and there is a nicer highlight roll-off, for example. This compression of highlights and shadows can be leveled out with the film compression tool. The expand menu helps to adjust the selected film stock to the contrast range usually expected from the output color space. White and black point can be set here as required. Now we're at the arguably most important menu. This is where you select the film on which the image is to be printed as the final step. I think the most widely used print film for cinema movies is Kodak 2383. However, Resolve comes with LUTs for various film stocks, which come very close to these here. The signal can also be output as linear or semi-analog to avoid the influence of the film print. There's also a slider for color density. Film has its own kind of saturation, which looks very rich in color, but still doesn't look oversaturated. It is difficult to explain, so here is a small example. To date, there are several density plugins or DCTLs for Resolve out there, which I also use personally, but it's nice to have such a slider available here too. The first thing that comes to most people's minds when they think of analog film is film grain. This is a fine to grainy aesthetic noise in the image, which is clearly different from digital noise. All tools have presets for 8, 16, 35, 65mm film, which should be scientifically closest to real film. However, everything can be changed by hand to suit your creative taste. Resolve also has a very good built-in film grain plugin, which is available in the studio version only. Let's take a quick look at the two variants. Halation is an effect that can be seen in the highlights and edges of analog film with strong contrast. It creates a reddish-orange glow. Resolve itself also has its own OFX plugin for this. Bloom is some kind of a diffuse glow effect, which is also created around bright light sources. There are also various presets here, which can all be customized by switching to custom. Next we have film damage. This is relatively self-explanatory. Various types of dust and cracks, which can occur unintentionally on analog film, can be simulated here. For me, however, the effects are far too strong. I would only use them very discreetly. Film breath is actually an unintentional error in the film, in which certain values such as brightness or contrast change from frame to frame. This can have several causes, but I'm not exactly familiar with them as I've never shot with real analog film. In any case, this peculiarity can be simulated here as an additional layer of realism. Gate weave falls into the same category. Here Dehancer tries to simulate what happens when the film strip is mechanically pulled through the camera or projector. This creates a small tremor or shake, which is to be simulated here. With the overscan tool, the perforation of the film strip can be displayed outside the exposed area for creative effect. There are also various options for different film types. I think vignette is self-explanatory, but I will solve something like this outside the plugin with masks in Resolve. I think you have far more options with the tools in Resolve itself. The monitor section is very exciting, and I would not have expected to find it within a film emulation plugin. False color is often used on professional cameras directly on set to set the exposure correctly. The image is divided into different brightness zones, which are displayed in color. In this way, clipping can be detected in a similar way to a zebra, or the same exposure for skin tones can be maintained from shot to shot. In the output section is the total impact slider, which works like a blend or opacity slider for the whole plugin. Next, we even have a built-in LUT generator. This allows you to export the built looks as a lookup table so that you can share them with others or use them directly on set as a reference. Of course, only the color and contrast changes can be displayed in a LUT. Fancy effects, such as film grain, halation and so on, will not be included. Nevertheless, it's a very useful feature. Last but not least, we have two different quality options. Dehancer is very resource hungry. It therefore makes sense to work with the normal option and only switch it to high at the end just before exporting. The plugin really needs a lot of horsepower. I have an RTX 4090 installed and I'm only working on a 1080p timeline for this review, and you can see that I don't always have real-time playback. So let's get to the pricing. At first glance, a lifetime license for $449 may seem extremely expensive, especially when you compare it to Resolve Studio, which only costs $299. Resolve is an NLE, a compositor, probably the best color app in the world, and an audio workstation. Dehancer is just a plugin that doesn't work on its own. Nevertheless, I think the price is justified for all the features and quality. If anything, I think Resolve is far too cheap for what it is, but I'm not complaining. If you decide to buy the Dehancer plugin, there's a 10% discount with the code shown. So let's come to the conclusion. After my relatively short test phase, I'm already very impressed with Dehancer. Many of the tools such as grain, halation and bloom can also be implemented with Resolve Sport tools. There are also hundreds of LUTs for film stocks. Some very good ones are even included free with Resolve. Tools such as the vignette are relatively unnecessary and you have more control over them in Resolve. There's now also a large selection of high-quality alternatives for film density tools. Nevertheless, I find all the possible image manipulations in Dehancer extremely well implemented, and it's really practical to have everything in one place and in the correct order. What I don't like so much is the UI. They are probably a bit tied to Resolve there, but I find the many menus, one below the other, extremely confusing. It looks a bit better in the Photoshop version though. Dehancer is also available as a Photoshop or Lightroom plugin, which I will definitely use in the future. It has its own interface with predefined presets and preview images. Everything just looks a bit tidier. Otherwise, the plugin works in a similar way. The biggest difference is that it expects the sRGB color space with a gamma of 2.2. Here are a few images from a trip to Bonnie, Scotland a few years ago. The variety of applications doesn't stop there. Dehancer is now even available as an iOS app. I don't use Apple devices myself, but a friend of mine tested the app for me and is very satisfied. He tested it on an iPhone 15 and the performance is okay. The app is available for free in the App Store. You only need a license to export the images. Dehancer, if you can hear me, please release an Android version too. Now, if you're interested in the plugin after this review, download it and try it out for free. All the links and the discount code are in the video description below. Thank you very much for sticking with me for so long. It was a first for me. I'll leave you with a few more before and after shots graded with Dehancer. Take care.